Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome back to another video. In this video, we're going to see how we can take a combination of Markdown and Python that looks like this and turn it into an interactive slideshow presentation that looks like this with all sorts of cool features, code embedding, plots being visible in the slide presentation, just a lot of cool stuff that we can see. So we're going to start with the basics and then work our way up to all sorts of more advanced features and functionality of Quarto slideshows using Python. Should be a lot of fun. Let's get into it. All right, so the first step that we're going to want to do is there's a GitHub repo, and I'll link this in the description. And as part of that GitHub repo, there's this slideshow folder that has the files that you'll see in this presentation, and also some extra assets and logos and all of that. I'll get into the details of this in a second. But I think before I even dive into the code, I think one thing that I do whenever I'm trying to build presentations in Quarto using Python is I always just look up like Quarto RevealJS docs. And I find that this page, docs/presentation/reveal.js, is so useful. There's this interactive slide presentation that's there that shows a lot of this functionality that we will see in this video. And to make this more Python focused, I kind of adapted some of the details that you see here, which I'll also link in the description, to a more Python based visualizations. But it's basically the same as we'll see here. But we'll kind of start with some basics first. Also, if you've never used Quarto before, if this term sounds new to you, I recommend checking out the recent Quarto crash course that we posted, which will be linked also. Everything's linked in the description today. Link that in the description. You don't need to watch that to check out this video, but some of the basics might be helpful to see in that video first before you kind of dive into some more advanced slideshow type features. Enough talking though, let's get into the code. So whenever you're starting a presentation in Quarto, I recommend creating a QMD file. So we're going to create I'm just going to call this like slideshow.qmd file. This is totally blank to start, and we will add some, I guess, initial YAML parameters. So I'm going to open and close these three dashes to specify my YAML parameters. And then if I want to make this a slideshow, I have two main options. So I'm going to go format, and I'm going to do RevealJS as the first option. And I can add big sections like this. So section 1, and then I could do like slide with 2 pound signs, a level 2 header. I can do slide 1, slide 2, slide 3. And then I could, insert some random text, insert some more text. This is all out of order, but in some random text. A lot of fun stuff here. And if I render this with Quarto, so if you install the Quarto VS Code extension and also install the Quarto CLI, that's all in the crash course, linked in the description. But if I preview this, we get a little slide presentation here. I'm also going to give this a title slide. So title, my cool Quarto slideshow. How about that? I'll give it an author, which is going to be my name, Keith Galley. And we will go with that for now. There's other parameters you can add here. But we see my cool slideshow, we see our first section, we see our section headings with our text. If I keep scrolling over, we see the slides switch. That's all good. Not super fancy right now. This is just Markdown. But where it starts getting cool is like, let's say on slide 3, I wanted to insert some Python code. I could do something like bracket Python. Accidentally added an extra bracket. And I could do something like import matplotlib.pyplot as plt, plt.plot, 1, 2, 3, 4. Very fun stuff. I could run this. And we see on that slide 3, we get our plot. If I also wanted to see the corresponding code alongside that, I could do echo is true. And that's going to display not only my plot, but also the code. I could also do other things like output location. And maybe I want it to be on a different slide. So this is going to now put that graph on the next slide over. So we go to slide 3 again. We're going to just see the code, but then on slide 4, we see the graph. I guess it's still part of slide 3, but it's just separate from the code. I could also add it as this column format. And now we look, and we have our code over here, and we get the graph output on the right. And I could also open this up and see this. So that's some of the very, very basics. Another cool thing that you can do, you don't have as much styling functionality and abilities, but you could also, if you needed to, change this to pptx, make it a PowerPoint presentation. I re-render this. What we're going to see over here is we've been working with an HTML file, but now we have this PowerPoint file. If I go ahead and open this up on my side, we see that we do get a presentation in PowerPoint format, which could be very helpful if you are working at a company that needs to use PowerPoint and you want to set up a template for your slide presentations. You don't have as much flexibility with the PowerPoint format. You can look up pptx Quarto and learn more, but I'm going to focus on this RevealJS format because I think that's where you get the most interactivity and the most benefit of really using Quarto. So I think to best demonstrate all of these different features and what functionality you have available to you, in this GitHub repo that is linked to the description, I think we need to get a linked in the description counter on the screen or something, because I've said that probably 7 times already. But in that file, we basically adapted that demo presentation that I just kind of shared, and we made it a little bit more Python specific. I'm going to remove some parameters first and then kind of walk into some more sophisticated details. So I'm going to render this, make this full screen. I'll hide the files, pull this down a bit. But we get this slide presentation. And I think probably to show a lot of the functionality, I'll show my code over here on the left side. And hopefully it is big enough that you can see. And I'll share the corresponding slide on the right side. So the title and all of that is specified up here with these YAML parameters. We specify that it's a RevealJS format here in the format spot. Then we specify some other things like slide number. We see that down at the bottom right. We see we get a footer, which can use the Markdown syntax. So I could do this as Quarto docs or something. And what you'll see is that the footer changes to Quarto docs down here instead of the actual URL. So you have flexibility with how you specify this. So if you wanted to always have reference material, you can use the footer. This is what's going to be on every single page unless it's specified otherwise. And you'll see what I mean in a bit. Embed resources just puts everything in a single HTML file versus having extra files. Little nuance there. But let's get into some of the actual code here. All right, so starting with the hello there slide, nothing crazy here. I'm going to just keep walking through until we get some more interesting things. So here we can see that on these corresponding slides, we just basically animate a little bit of a difference between 2 Python cells, this and this. And so when I run these two, between these two, it animates the code between them. But we don't see any output. Part of the reason we don't see any output is because we are just using this Python class versus actually making this Python code. And so when we're just showing off our actual code and we don't want anything output, sometimes it's best to use this .python syntax. But if we're actually running the code, use the Python syntax like that. And you can actually see that it adapts in my editor when you're using VS Code to show that I can now run that cell. As we go on a little bit further, other cool things you might want to do code specifically is line highlighting. So as we can see in this example, we start by highlighting lines 4 to 5, and then we highlight line 7, and then we highlight line 10. And when I step through this presentation, we see that that happens. I could also then put at the end, you can add as many of these highlights as you want. So maybe I wanted to show 1 through 10. I could do something like this. And then at the very last moment of this, I step through, and then the last one, all 10 lines are highlighted. We also see that we can specify separate footers than the one we specified at the top using this footer syntax. Getting into some data visualization, we can see some basic Matplotlib code here. Just as I showed in the simple example, we have output location slide here. So when we actually get an output for this plot, it's going to show up on the next screen. I can pop this open bigger so you can see. We can also have interactive plots. And for whatever reason, this one's not loading right now. Refresh this, maybe it will. Let me just double check what's going on here. I'm going to rerun this real quick on the Plotly slide. Okay, we see our Plotly chart. I think that's the sizing is causing it a little bit of issue. So we see a little Plotly graph. And you can interact with this. I can zoom in on certain areas. I can see information on the Plotly chart. And this one's below, so it overruns a bit. So you could, if you wanted to, as we did with the Matplotlib example, I could do output location as slide and then just have this fully on the next slide. And so now we see on the next slide this graph just fully by itself. That's Plotly, so Matplotlib, Plotly. We could do other things. So like one cool thing is maybe we wanted a Matplotlib visualization and we wanted to show the code, but then we wanted to pop up the chart right next to it, but maybe we didn't want them to appear at the same time. One thing we can do is this column fragment way of doing things. And also worth mentioning is I've surrounded a lot of these code blocks with this smaller class. If I remove this, you're going to see that the content within our slide gets bigger. So when we rerun this, the code, it might actually overrun and not fit in the screen perfectly. Go to the next slide. So you see it fills up a bit more space. And I often like, if I have a lot of code, passing in this smaller tag just to make things fit a bit better. But we did see that with this slide, this column fragment one, it starts without the chart, and then you click in and we see the animation. And we see our code because we're specifying this echo is true. I could also specify just column instead of column fragment. And then when we run this, they will already, the sine waves and the cosine wave will already be on the screen, as you can see there. So there's a bunch of different options for this output location. You also could just turn off the output. You can make this false and then just see the code and nothing else, I believe. Yeah, so now that output is, even though we have output location column, that output's just not going to appear. Again, we can do Seaborn visualizations. So you can do all the different visualizations you expect. We can also do things like showcase just data frames. So here's a simple data frame. And I'm just passing df at the bottom of my code cell. And we see that tables example. You can explore different ways to visualize your table. So one cool posit library is this library called Great Tables, which is pretty new in the Python ecosystem. But using code like you see here, we can generate cool charts like this, cool tables. So maybe you wanted a little bit more fancy of a table within your slide presentation. As you can see the code over here, that can be done with a combination of Great Tables. And we just display our table down here. You can also lay out things in columns. So like maybe you wanted a column describing your data set, and then you wanted to actually specify a table of your data. We can do something like that. If you run into the situation where your table runs off the screen, there's a couple of parameters that you have access to. So you have access to, up here, you have something called scrollable. So this will let you scroll if anything overflows. You also have access to height, width, margin. So I could specify, like, maybe I wanted my width to be like 1800 and fill up more of the screen. Maybe I wanted my margin to just be touching the edges of the screen. I can also do like min or max scale or something like that. So it lets things scale up bigger and bigger. And I think by default that's set to 2. So as I dynamically resize this in an open window, I can specify different parameters. So you see no margin now when we open this. I just specified that margin 0. Well, I also specified more space, so it is filling up a bit more of this space, and you see it runs over on both sides there. So you have a lot of different controls to play around with. I'll leave this. I think I had this at like 1500. I will leave the margin as the default. I'll leave the scale as the default as well. Rerun this. And we're going to see that margin reappear. You can also render LaTeX. So if you had mathematical equations you wanted to show in your presentation, you can do that easily with Quarto. And that can be very helpful because I feel like it can be really annoying if you have a slide presentation and you need to show complex math. What you can see here is this is showing off the LaTeX code that we're sharing. So this is the left side of the screen, the column with 40% that's on the left side. And then when we do equals text, then we're actually rendering that LaTeX. And that's how we see these more traditional mathematical equations appear on the screen. We can also do fancy things like, let's see. Did I do LaTeX equations twice in this presentation? I don't think so. Oh, okay, sorry. I was getting ahead of myself. We can do all sorts of cool presentation features like incremental lists I find super helpful. So by surrounding a dashed list with these : incremental and closing that fence div off with the same colons, we can get a list like this, which I find very helpful. I like when I'm doing presentations to, say one thing at a time and really emphasize that point that I'm talking about. I think that as far as staying focused, you don't want to throw too much on the screen at once. So leveraging these incremental lists and these fragments, which is another feature that you're seeing right now, can be very, very helpful. So you see the fragments here. When you specify a fragment with your fence div, you have different options like fading in, fading up, fading left, fade in, then semi out, all of these different things. This is all being adapted from that demo that I shared in the description. Link in the description counter. We're at like 9 or 10 at this point. Love it. All right, slide backgrounds. Let's get into some more interesting things here. This is all interesting. What am I talking about? You can specify different colors here with background and specifying a hex color. So I could do something like, what's an interesting color? I wish I knew hex colors off the top of my head. I feel like it's hard for me to mentally grasp that, but I will pull in a hex color. I'll just write some random numbers. We'll see what happens. Let's see what color this is. It's like a fun blue color. Makes sense because these first two numbers are my R, these second two numbers are my G, and these last two numbers, or letters in this case, are my B. And these are the highest values over here from a hexadecimal perspective. So it's the most blue. So that's why we get this slide background as the blue color, but you could specify any hex color there. We also can do cool stuff with like actually having images as our background. So in the folder, we have a bunch of images. So we see we're using the Milky Way image as our background right now, using this background image parameter within our slide. We're specifying that. But we could also do a background video or a background iframe as well. Good to know that you can, position elements in different spots. Another useful thing here is that you see that these pop up in absolute position spots. This can be super useful if you need to display, you want to pop up a certain image at a certain time as you're talking about something. So we're using the absolute values like left, width, height, top, etc. to specify where these show up. But another important aspect of this is that we're specifying that these are fragments, and we can also specify the order that they appear by the fragment index. So if we look at this cat image, we see it has a fragment index equals 3. I think if you specify a fragment index, it's always going to come before ones that don't have any fragment index specified. So what we're going to see is this group of 4 kitties appear before this cute kitty that looks like it's maybe on a sink or something. So let's see that. 4 kitties appear, then kitty on the sink appears, and then other kitty appears. I could very easily make this fragment index 20. I mean, this could be any number. It just is measuring the relative order. So I could make this 3. I could add a fragment index here, which equals 1. And now what we're going to see is this little kitty appear first, then this kitty, and then the 4 kitties. So rerun this. That kitty appears first, then that kitty, and then finally the 4 kitties. So that is done with these absolute positioning and using fragment and fragment index. And these images are also in that repo. They're in images and then cats. So you can do all sorts of cool things. I find it very, very powerful to have things appear at certain times. I want to just keep walking through. I'm not going to go into tons and tons of details, I think, with this other stuff. You can check it all out in the code, whether that be in the official docs or the more Python-focused QMD examples that I'm sharing as part of this presentation. I'll kind of just step through some additional things that we can do though. So we saw all of this. We saw fragments. We saw these images popping up in random spots. You can do some animations. You can do slide transitions like this and have tab sets. So you can have both your plot and then your data separately. You can have interactive slides, which you saw with Plotly, but you could also add like a folium map or something here, which is pretty cool. Where are we right now in this map? I think we're in Eugene, Oregon. Folium library is fun for that reason. We could do other types of slide intros. So we see I think I can't, let me read what I wrote. Concave there. So that's a concave transition. You can do the zoom transition. You can just fade a transition in. You could do this convex transition. all sorts of slide transitions that you can have fun with. So you have a lot that you can work with within this RevealJS format. You can also click Alt and zoom in on certain parts of the screen, which can be helpful if you want to emphasize something. Bunch of cool stuff here. I think one thing that I will mention is if you press, I think, B. I don't know what B does. I'll show you. You can do R to do the scroll view. There's a bunch of key syntax that we can do that is useful. Okay, here's some useful things. This chalkboard is super useful, and I don't have my chalkboard on right now, but if I added down here, so I'm going to take out this embed resources real quick, because if I try to add this chalkboard, just call this true, it's going to yell at me for trying to embed resources and do the chalkboard. See that? So that's what it's telling me. It's telling me you got to not do it that way. And so now we added this chalkboard. And what's cool about this chalkboard is if I press C, basically it activates the ability for me to draw on my slides. So if you're giving a lecture, this can be a very, very useful tool. You can also actually enter this chalkboard. And so if you had like a writing tablet, this might be a bit easier to see, but you can write on the screen, which if you're trying to annotate, trying to emphasize something, very, very valuable. So that gets you to the screen. If you click this little button or just press, I think, C, you can draw different things on your screen. It will not stay there and maybe there's a control that you can, oh, I guess it is staying. If you disable it, I think it disappears. Maybe I'm wrong. I think there's some controls you have if you wanted to get rid of what you've written on your chalkboard. All right, I'm going to disable the chalkboard for now. Other useful things, if you press E, you're going to go into this, and this is probably more useful if you see it in a full screen view. If I press E, you're going to go into this like view that looks like this. That's just a little bit more appropriate for PDFs. And then if I right click, so I pressed the key E, if I do print, I could save this as a PDF and kind of send it just like I would maybe a PowerPoint presentation, which can be very, very useful if you're trying to share this with teammates. So you could output a PDF, or you could send that HTML file if you have this embed resources equals true. I'm going to press E again to go back to that normal view. Are there other things that we should talk about here? These preview links are cool option. I could like click this and it will pop open another tab like Python documentation within my presentation. I can exit out of that. I can hit G and type a certain slide number that I want to go to. I can do M to toggle a menu over here. I can see different tools I have available in this menu. This menu is also accessible down in the bottom left. I don't know if you saw, but down at the bottom here, there's a color that is telling our progress. So there's a progress bar that you can activate, or it's active by default. Other stuff that's available too. I think one thing that I do want to showcase is that in the most recent Quarto update, there's the ability to use a brand file. So I will link a link counter is at maybe 12 or 13, maybe more, but I will link in the description a good blog article about this new feature which is a brand.yaml file that you can specify. I will try to pop that up on the screen real quick. Brand YAML Quarto. Here we go. basically you can add a file that looks like this and have your own custom themes that work across not only the RevealJS format, but also dashboards and HTML reports using Quarto. So I recommend reading through this as well as the blog post that I will link. So this is just in the documentation. And you can see some different options that you have available to you. I made a little, I had fun and made a little brand file for myself with a AI generated logo and all of that fun stuff. I also have that in the GitHub repo. So if I open my files up, I see I have brand.yaml, which specifies some different types of colors. It specifies a logo, specifies some like meta information about my brand file. You can play around with typography too. I temporarily removed the typography stuff, but you can see with these brand YAML files that you have access to like playing around with different types of fonts and whatnot. There's also a very useful LLM prompt somewhere in here that I saw. I'll see if I can find it. But basically you can, like what I did to generate my brand file was I looked at the examples that they provided. And I guess here, yeah, I'm going this brand YAML. I looked at the, oh, here we go. Yeah, so I'll share some of this information on the brand YAML, but somewhere in these docs, I found an example that gave an LLM prompt that you could use to basically generate your own brand YAML file if you know some of the parameters. And I basically did that using Claude and just pasting in some examples of brand files that I found, as well as pasting in some colors that I wanted and whatnot, and ultimately got out, a brand YAML file that looks like this. I'll probably add back in some of the font stuff that I removed in the code. But now if I specify in my slideshow, brand is brand.yaml, and we rerun this, we're going to see all sorts of cool colors that are unique to my brand, which is super creatively just using a K and G right now. So we see this little logo down here at the bottom. It's in the logos folder. I'll try to open this up. As you can see, that's my little KG logo. But now if we look at our presentation, we get this nice looking, I'll pop this open full screen so you can truly appreciate it. Get this nice looking blue color. It can be overwritten, so like on this slide, it's directly the background color is overwriting it, but it just looks quite nice with this blue and green and having that actual logo down there. It just much more, fits maybe a personality or a profile that you always use in any of your brand materials. And it's nice too, if you're working with a team using this brand YAML file, everyone can have consistent presentations across your team. So a lot of stuff to play around with that brand YAML. One thing I also should mention is that I specified the brand YAML with it like this, but if you named this as instead just underscore brand YAML, it will automatically leverage that in your QMD files. So if we go like to slideshow.qmd, that very simple example we showed, we see that that also is now getting the branded guide. And I guess I didn't even specify that this was RevealJS here, or format. So you see it has that theme too. And I didn't specify brand anywhere here. It just knew that it could use this brand.yaml because it's specified with this underscore brand YAML in a way that's just automatically understood. One final thing I might mention here is that if you're a Python coder, you often might work with Jupyter notebooks or something. So I could do Jupyter notebook example. That's too long of a name. Example.ipython notebook. I could add some code here. Python code. I'm going to just close this out so I have more screen space. And maybe I make my first cell a Markdown cell. Import libraries. Import pandas as PD. Import numpy as NP. A lot of fun stuff. Run that. Then maybe I plot a simple graph. One thing that I can do here and plot a more sophisticated graph. So I'm just making a standard Jupyter notebook right now. Plot a more sophisticated Matplotlib plot in Python. Gotta love Copilot sometimes. Run this. Generate, run. Oh, why is it making it R? I don't want R code right now. Python code. Okay, so a more sophisticated plot. One thing that's cool is I similarly could add to my Jupyter notebook, I could add these 3 dashes, top and bottom. I could specify the format is RevealJS, and I could then in my terminal run Quarto render example.ipython notebook. We get this example.html file. If I open that up, we see we actually get a presentation via a presentation using our Jupyter notebook. And I might just actually try this one more time. I want to make this a separate cell. I think it was getting mad at me for putting both my options and my import libraries in the same cell. And one thing you sometimes have to do too is run a Quarto render example.ipython notebook, but then you want to also specify this -- execute parameter to make sure that the Jupyter notebook actually runs. So now if I look at this example.html, okay, we get it in a way that we're more expecting. Import libraries, plot a simple graph, plot a more sophisticated graph. And we can specify all the same parameters as we did before. And if I specified something like echo is true here, it's going to actually show those libraries. If I do the same thing here, it will actually show this code. Run that again. So we see our code. So you can play around with this. You could make a slideshow. If you are smart with how you write your Jupyter notebooks, you can create a slideshow just from your Jupyter notebook, which can be super, super useful. A lot of cool stuff that you can do with Python and Quarto and the combination of the two. If you have any questions about any of this, let us know in the comments and maybe we can answer them with future videos. But I find it super useful to just be able to easily write my code and then basically without much extra work, just a little bit of Markdown sprinkling, basically have a presentation out of that. Tons of cool stuff. I feel like I've learned tons of features through this, but I'm still learning more every day. So it's kind of like, as you kind of go, I think it's easier to learn more and more, but hopefully this showed a lot of the features. Check out the links in the description for the docs, the code, and just different resources that will help you learn more. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to throw it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Another Python and Quarto video will be coming soon. Until then, peace out.